The Velmar Intergalactic Academy sat perched on the edge of Kepler's 7 station, like a monument to everything the galaxy considered proper, civilized, and absolutely, positively safe. For 300 cycles, the institution had maintained its reputation as the premier educational facility for the children of the galactic community's most prominent families. The architecture alone screamed sophistication. Sweeping curves of bioluminescent coral from Thesara Prime, gravity-defying spires held together by Vendorian phase crystals, and meditation gardens maintained at precisely 0.8 standard gravity for optimal contemplation. Every corner of the academy whispered the same message. Here, evolution had been tamed, instinct had been civilized out, and violence was merely a theoretical concept discussed in philosophy classes. The student body reflected this carefully curated vision of galactic harmony. Quilnari students, their crystalline bodies refracting light in prismatic cascades, glided through hallways with mathematical precision. Thessaran youth, all 6 of their delicate manipulator arms working in synchronized grace, practiced their traditional art forms in designated creative spaces. Even the Draelith, who technically qualified as apex predators on their homeworld, carried themselves with a kind of casual arrogance that only came from 10,000 years of never meeting anything that could credibly threaten them. Their idea of danger was a strongly worded disagreement during parliamentary debate season. The Academy's safety record was legendary. 0 incidents of actual violence in 3 centuries. 0. The administration loved reminding everyone of this fact, usually while gesturing dramatically at the massive holographic display in the entrance hall that counted upward in real time. Days since last incident. The number had gotten so large it required scientific notation. Faculty members gave lectures about their safety protocols at educational conferences across 12 sectors. They'd written textbooks. They'd won awards. They'd become insufferably smug about it, frankly, which made the arrival of the new transfer student all the more interesting, in that ancient curse sort of way. She walked through the station's docking bay on a humid Tuesday afternoon, looking for all the galaxy like someone who'd gotten lost on their way to a botanical garden. Slight build, maybe 60 kilograms soaking wet. With that peculiar smoothness of skin that came from worlds without proper scales or protective carapaces. Her species file listed her homeworld as Earth, a name that meant absolutely nothing to the intake administrator who processed her paperwork. Colony world, probably. Some backwater settlement where humans had carved out a modest existence, growing space vegetables or mining asteroids. The administrator barely glanced at the classification codes. Class 12 Deathworld. Well, that was clearly an error in the database. Look at her. She was wearing a backpack with little pins on it. One of them had a smiling cartoon animal. Deathworlders did not have cartoon animals on their backpacks. The human girl, whose name the administration had already managed to mangle in 3 different databases, arrived at Velmar Academy with a kind of genuine enthusiasm that immediately marked her as hopelessly naive. She smiled at everyone. She actually made eye contact, which sent several Quilnari students skittering away in discomfort. She tried to help a Thessaran carrying too many data tablets and nearly caused a diplomatic incident when her reflexes were too fast, and she caught all 6 tablets before they hit the ground. The Thessaran had stared at her with 4 of its compound eyes for a full 10 seconds before hastily retrieving its property and backing away with the careful deliberation of someone who just realized they were standing next to a malfunctioning fusion reactor. Her assigned roommate, a Quilnari named Vexith, had the kind of reaction most species reserved for finding out their new neighbor was a singularity containment facility with a spotty safety record. Vexith's crystalline structure actually changed color when the human walked into their shared dormitory space, shifting from a calm blue to a stressed orange that would have been comedic if it wasn't so genuinely pitiable. "Hi, I'm your new roommate," the human announced, her vocal cords producing sounds in a frequency range that made Vexith's entire molecular structure vibrate sympathetically. "This place is amazing. I've never seen architecture like this. Is your species naturally crystalline, or is that an augmentation? Either way, it's beautiful." Vexith, who communicated through carefully modulated light pulses, managed a weak greeting that translated roughly as, "Welcome, please do not touch me. I am very fragile." "Oh, don't worry," the human said, apparently interpreting this correctly. "I'll be super careful. I grew up with 3 younger siblings, so I'm used to watching where I step." This was meant to be reassuring. Somehow, the image of tiny humans crawling around underfoot made it significantly worse. Vexith spent the next hour researching Earth in the galactic database and discovered, to her mounting crystalline horror, that human children were essentially indestructible compared to Quilnari young. Human toddlers routinely survived falls that would shatter Vexith into component molecules. They put things in their mouths as an exploratory mechanism, which suggested immune systems that operated on principles Vexith species would consider theoretical weapons technology. The human, blissfully unaware of her roommate's existential crisis, unpacked her belongings with the kind of casual efficiency that came from a lifetime of adapting to new environments. She hung up clothes made from woven plant fibers, which was mildly horrifying to species who wore synthesized smart fabrics. She placed a small potted plant on her desk, something green and leafy that apparently required regular watering because her world was so absurdly abundant with liquid water that they used it decoratively. She set out a framed photograph showing herself with 3 other humans, all displaying their omnivore teeth in what her species apparently considered a friendly expression. The first week of classes revealed the disconnect between what the human appeared to be and what she actually was, with all the subtlety of a containment breach. In xenobiology, Professor Thelkar, a distinguished Vendorian scholar with 4 doctoral degrees, had the students undergo standard medical scans as part of the comparative physiology unit. The equipment had been calibrated for every known sentient species in the Academy's database. It took one look at the human's internal systems and had what could only be described as a mechanical breakdown. "Your resting heart rate is 72 beats per minute," Professor Thelkar observed, his phase-shifted voice carrying the kind of concern usually reserved for discussing critical patients in triage. That is faster than a Drelith's combat rhythm." "Oh, is it?" the human asked, looking genuinely curious. "I've always been pretty calm, actually. My doctor said I have low blood pressure." "Low blood pressure?" The professor consulted his data tablet with mounting concern. Her blood pressure, by academic standards, would indicate a catastrophic cardiovascular event in progress. For the human, it was apparently normal. Healthy, even. Her body maintained this pressure constantly, just as a baseline, pumping that much fluid through her system every moment of every day. The sheer energetic cost was staggering. "And your immune system," Professor Thelkar continued, now scrolling through readouts with the fascination of someone watching a reactor approach critical mass. "It's attacking everything, constantly." "Well, yeah," the human said, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the galaxy. "How else would it work?" How else would it work? The professor, who had spent 40 years studying immunology, had to sit down. The human's defensive systems operated on a principle of overwhelming, constant aggression that would exhaust most species into total organ failure within hours. Her body was essentially at war with the entire microbial universe at all times, and winning and treating this as normal background operation. Physical education class went about as well as could be expected, which is to say, it was a disaster wrapped in a catastrophe and served with a side of interspecies trauma. The class was held in one of Velmar's state-of-the-art training facilities, complete with adjustable gravity, customizable atmospheric composition, and enough safety features to make a military bunker jealous. The instructor, a grizzled Thessaran named Kelvas, who'd been teaching for 60 years, had seen every possible body type struggle through basic fitness assessments. She considered herself unshockable. The human changed that opinion in approximately 4 minutes. Standard endurance assessment, Kelvas announced, gesturing to the track that circled the facility's perimeter. 3 laps at your comfortable pace. This is purely diagnostic, so don't push yourselves. The Quilnari students managed 1 lap before politely requesting breaks. The Drelith students, prideful as ever, completed 2 laps with visible effort. The human completed 3 laps and looked around with confusion when everyone else had stopped. "Is that it?" she asked, not even breathing hard. "I usually run about 5 kilometers in the morning. Should I keep going?" 5 kilometers. Every morning. For fun. Kelvas checked the readouts from the human's biosensor. Certain there had been an equipment malfunction. No malfunction. The human's cardiovascular system had barely registered the exercise. Her body temperature had increased by less than 1 degree. She was designed for this, built for it. The realization settled over Kelvas like a shroud. This human was a persistence predator. Her species had evolved to chase prey animals to exhaustion across continental distances. The track exercise that pushed other students to their limits was, for her, the biological equivalent of a light stroll. "That's sufficient," Kelvas managed, making a note to completely redesign the curriculum before the next session. The cafeteria incident happened on day 4 and became the stuff of immediate legend. Velmar Academy's dining facility offered cuisine from 70 different worlds, prepared according to each species' dietary requirements and cultural preferences. The Quilnari section served mineral suspensions. The Thessarans had their algae-based nutrients. The Drelith enjoyed synthesized proteins that approximated their traditional hunt-feast meals. Everyone had their niche. Everyone was happy. Then the human arrived and loaded her tray with items from the carnivore section. The carnivore section, it should be noted, was a relatively small area maintained primarily for the handful of species who'd evolved from predatory backgrounds, but had long since civilized themselves into synthetic meat substitutes. Nobody actually ate real animal proteins anymore. It was considered gauche, primitive. The fact that the section even existed was a nod to tradition more than practical use. The human piled her tray with actual cooked flesh, not synthesized, not cultured in a lab. Actual muscle tissue from animals, prepared with various plant materials and seasoning compounds. She added something called cheese, which was apparently coagulated mammary secretions from quadrupedal herbivores. She topped it off with a beverage containing processed sugar in quantities that would send most species into immediate metabolic shock. Then she sat down at a communal table and began eating with obvious enjoyment. The herbivorous students couldn't look away. It was like watching a singularity devour a star system. Horrifying. But you couldn't quite manage to close your eyes. She used her teeth, those flat omnivore teeth, to tear the flesh apart. She chewed with mechanical efficiency. She swallowed pieces that seemed far too large, trusting her digestive system to handle the breakdown. And her digestive system, filled with enough acid to dissolve metal, apparently had no problem with this task. Is that actual animal tissue?" A brave Quilnari student finally asked, her light pulses stuttering with distress. Oh yeah, the human said between bites. It's chicken. Well, chicken analog. I guess real chicken is hard to get out here, but it's pretty close. You guys should try it. The suggestion that they should consume the flesh of other organisms caused 3 students to leave the cafeteria immediately. The human watched them go with obvious confusion, then shrugged and continued eating. She finished her meal, disposed of her waste properly, and left with a friendly wave. Behind her, the cafeteria buzzed with frantic conversation. Someone pulled up Earth's classification on the galactic database. Class 12 Deathworld. The number meant nothing to most students. So they dug deeper. They found the classification criteria. They found the survival statistics. They found the biological survey data. Earth was not a backwater colony world. Earth was a nightmare planet where everything was trying to kill everything else at all times. And humans were the species that had won that particular evolutionary war through sheer stubborn refusal to die. They'd started as prey animals and worked their way up the food chain through a combination of endurance, intelligence, and apparently an absolute unwillingness to accept reasonable limits on their behavior. The students looked at the cheerful human who just consumed another organism's flesh as casually as they drink water, and a collective understanding settled over Velmar Academy. They had seriously miscalculated. The challenge, when it came, was issued by a Draelith student named Shev, who represented everything his species valued: pride, tradition, and an unshakable belief in their own superiority. The Draelith had been the apex species on their homeworld for so long that the concept of genuine threat had become theoretical. They were tall, averaging 2.3 meters. They were strong, capable of lifting 3 times their body weight. They were fast, with reflexes honed by millions of years of hunting smaller prey. By every reasonable metric, they were superior physical specimens. Shev had watched the human's first week with growing annoyance. The way other students whispered about her. The way faculty members kept adjusting their lesson plans. The way she moved through spaces as if she had every right to be there, despite being this tiny, soft thing from some nowhere world. It offended him on a fundamental level. Combat simulation, he announced during tactical theory class, his voice resonating with harmonic authority. You and me, human. This academy has a proud tradition of testing combat theory in controlled environments. I challenge you to demonstrate whether all this whispered fear is justified, or if you're simply benefiting from superstition. The human looked up from her data tablet with surprise. Oh, I don't think that's a good idea. Because you're afraid? Shev suggested, his crest flaring in a display of dominance. No. Because I don't want to hurt your feelings, the human said with apparent sincerity. I grew up with competitive siblings. It sometimes got intense. The class interpreted this as either remarkable humility or incredible arrogance. Shev chose to interpret it as the latter. Tomorrow, after final lesson period, the simulation arena. Unless you'd prefer to concede now? The human sighed, a gesture that involved her entire respiratory system in a way that reminded everyone present that she processed oxygen with terrifying efficiency. Okay, fine. But I'm apologizing in advance. Word spread through Velmar Academy with the speed of light through vacuum. By the next afternoon, the simulation arena's observation deck was packed with students from every species, every social group, every academic discipline. The betting pools opened immediately. Most money went to Shev, naturally. The Draelith were warriors by heritage. The human was, well, human. She looked like a strong breeze might inconvenience her. The simulation arena itself was a marvel of safety engineering. It used hard light constructs to create environments, holographic weapons that delivered harmless but convincing feedback through neural links, and enough monitoring systems to detect and prevent any actual danger. Students had been using it for decades without incident. The simulation would read their intentions, their strategies, their physical capabilities, and create a balanced combat scenario that tested tactical thinking without any risk of actual harm. The technician running the system loaded a standard urban combat scenario, a medium-sized structure with multiple levels, various cover points, and enough complexity to allow for creative strategy. Both participants would receive standard loadouts: one primary weapon, one secondary, and basic defensive equipment. The simulation would end when one participant scored 3 hits on the other, or after 15 minutes elapsed. Karshev entered the arena with the confidence of someone who'd trained for this his entire life. His species had martial traditions older than some civilizations. He'd studied under masters, practiced forms, meditated on the philosophy of combat. He stretched his considerable frame, testing the simulation's physical feedback systems, satisfied when they responded with appropriate resistance. He selected a pulse rifle as his primary weapon and a short-range stunner as backup. Traditional choices. Reliable. The human entered the arena wearing standard academy athletic clothing and looking distinctly uncomfortable with the whole situation. She'd tied her hair back, which seemed like an odd priority. She tested the simulation's haptic feedback by jumping a few times, then doing a series of movements that looked like preparatory stretches but involved joints bending in ways that made several observers wince. She was loose, ready, but also somehow still friendly, which was deeply unsettling when combined with the predatory efficiency of her movements. She selected her weapons with less ceremony. The same pulse rifle, primarily because it was the default option, and no secondary. When asked about defensive equipment, she shook her head. "I'm good." The countdown began. 10 seconds. Karshev visualized his strategy. Move to high ground, establish firing position, use superior reach and strength to control the engagement. It was textbook. It was proper. It was how civilized species approach tactical problems. 5 seconds. The human closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her heart rate, monitored by the observation systems, actually decreased. She was calming herself, getting centered. Several xenobiology students noted this with interest. Adrenaline suppression before combat was not a typical prey behavior. 0. Karshev moved immediately, his long limbs carrying him toward the structure's main stairwell with impressive speed. His plan was solid. Reach the second level, find a window, control the sight lines. He'd force the human to come to him, then use his superior reflexes to end the match quickly. Clean, efficient, a proper demonstration of Drelith superiority. He'd made it approximately 12 meters when he realized he'd lost track of the human. She wasn't where he'd last seen her. She wasn't following him. She wasn't in any of the obvious positions he'd anticipated. For a moment, genuine confusion crossed Karshev's face. Where had she gone? The arena wasn't that large. She couldn't just vanish. Then he heard it. A soft, scraping sound above him. He looked up just in time to see the human dropping from a second-story window he'd assumed was inaccessible. She'd somehow climbed the outside of the structure in the time it took him to reach the stairs. She landed with bent knees, absorbing impact that should have damaged joints, and rolled forward with fluid precision. Before Karshev could bring his weapon to bear, she'd closed the distance between them. The pulse rifle, it turned out, was not designed for close-quarters combat. The human seemed to understand this instinctively. She moved inside his reach, too close for the weapon to effectively target her, and struck the rifle with her palm in a way that leveraged mechanical advantage against his grip strength. The weapon clattered across the arena floor. Khrushchev reached for his stunner. She already had it, had somehow pulled it from his holster while simultaneously moving away from a counterstrike he hadn't even fully committed to yet. She was reading him, anticipating, processing his movements faster than his own nervous system could complete them. The first point went to the human. The simulation registered the stunner hit and reset both combatants to opposite sides of the arena. Khrushchev's confidence had developed cracks. That initial exchange had happened too fast. She'd moved like water, like something that couldn't be pinned down or predicted. He'd trained against the best Drelith fighters in 5 sectors. None of them moved like that. They had forms, techniques, recognizable patterns. The human had seemed almost formless, responding to him rather than executing pre-planned sequences. The second round began. Khrushchev adjusted his strategy. Keep distance. Use the rifle's range advantage. Don't let her close again. It was sound tactical thinking. It would have worked against any opponent from any species he'd previously encountered. It did not work against the human. She didn't charge him this time. She moved laterally, using cover, constantly forcing him to adjust his aim. She was patient, persistent, and she was learning. Every time he fired, every time he repositioned, she gathered data, analyzed, adapted. It was like fighting an opponent who got smarter with each exchange. Because that's exactly what she was. The human persistence hunter model of intelligence wasn't about having the fastest reflexes or the strongest initial attack. It was about pattern recognition, about tracking prey across impossible distances by reading signs, predicting behavior, understanding the target better than it understood itself. Khrushchev was prey now. And the awful part was that he was beginning to realize it. She led him through the structure in what he thought was evasion, but was actually mapping. She was learning the space, understanding sight lines, identifying every potential advantage. And then, when she'd gathered enough information, she struck. The human came through a window Khrushchev had assumed was decorative. It was 3 meters off the ground. She jumped it from a standing position, crashed through in a spray of holographic glass, and landed in a roll that brought her up behind his firing position. She had the pulse rifle, his rifle, the one she'd taken in round 1 and apparently kept, pressed against his spine before his brain finished processing the sound of breaking glass. Second point. The observation deck had gone completely silent. The third round was when things got genuinely disturbing. Khrushchev was shaken now, his earlier pride replaced with something uncomfortably close to fear. He could see it in her eyes during the reset. Focus, intent, that terrible predator calculation that recognized him not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. Her pupils had dilated slightly. Her breathing had shifted to a rhythm that optimized oxygen intake. Her body language had shed every trace of the friendly, accommodating student and revealed something underneath that was purpose-built for exactly this scenario. The human didn't wait for Khrushchev to move this time. She came at him directly, and it was like watching evolution in fast forward. Every movement was efficient. Every step served multiple purposes. She feinted left, drawing his fire, then went right before his nervous system could fully commit to tracking the false movement. She threw her rifle at him, not as an attack but as a distraction, while simultaneously diving into a roll that brought her past his firing arc. She came up inside his guard again, but this time he was ready. He dropped his weapon and went for a grappling technique, using his superior size and strength. She adapted mid-motion. Instead of trying to out-muscle him, which would have been impossible, she used his momentum against him, redirected his force, found the mechanical leverage points where strength mattered less than physics. Khrushchev found himself airborne, then on his back, then staring up at the human who had somehow gotten his stunner again and was pointing it at his chest with hands that were absolutely, perfectly steady. Third point. Match over. The arena dissolved around them, returning to its default state. The silence in the observation deck was absolute. Khrushchev lay on the floor for a moment, his pride shattered as thoroughly as any Quilnari crystal structure, trying to process what had just happened. The human offered him a hand up, her expression shifting back to that friendly concern that was somehow worse than the predatory focus had been. "Sorry," she said, and she actually sounded apologetic. "I grew up with 2 older brothers who played pretty rough. You kind of reminded me of our sparring sessions. Are you okay?" Khrushchev took her hand. What else could he do? And let her help him up. Her grip was solid, confident, the grip of something that had never doubted its ability to survive. What are you? Human?" she said, confused by the question. "Did I hurt you? I was trying to be gentle." Gentle. She'd been holding back. The realization spread through the observation deck like a shock wave. That entire demonstration, which had demolished the Academy's best Draelith combatant with terrifying efficiency, had been the human being gentle. Not trying to win quickly, not trying to humiliate. Just playing, the way her species apparently played. Professor Kelvas pulled up Earth's entry in the galactic database and began reading aloud to the stunned audience. The details that no one had bothered checking before because the human seemed so harmless. Earth's gravity, 1.0 g, which was significantly higher than the Academy's standard 0.8 g. The human had been operating at a disadvantage this entire time and treating it as normal. Earth's atmospheric composition, high oxygen content that would be considered a fire hazard on most civilized worlds. The human's cardiovascular system was optimized to extract energy from air that was literally more dangerous than what everyone else breathed. Then came the predator adaptations. Stereoscopic vision for tracking prey across distance. Persistence hunting strategies that involved following prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. Throwing accuracy that resulted from millions of years of killing prey animals with projectiles. A cognitive system that specialized in pattern recognition and predictive modeling, essentially making every human a tactical computer by default. And perhaps most disturbing, social cooperation. Humans were pack hunters. This one human was terrifying. A coordinated group of humans would be unstoppable. "Oh, definitely," the human agreed when someone mentioned this, somehow making it worse by being cheerful about it. Humans do really well in teams. It's kind of our thing. We used to take down prey animals way bigger than us by working together. Mammoths, mostly. You guys have mammoths here? They're like these huge herbivores with tusks. Super dangerous alone, but if you get 10 or 12 humans with spears and coordinate properly, you can bring them down pretty reliably. The casual description of organized violence against megafauna made several students physically recoil. The human didn't notice. She was smiling, apparently lost in fond memories of her species' genocidal efficiency against large mammals. The aftermath of the simulation spread through Velmar Academy like a virus, which was probably an unfortunate metaphor, given what everyone had learned about human immune systems. Within hours, the entire student body had watched the footage. Within a day, faculty members were in emergency meetings about curriculum adjustments. Within a week, the human had become a legend, a cautionary tale, and a source of existential dread all at once. Vexith, the crystalline roommate, had stress fractured 3 times just from reviewing the combat footage. Her structure literally couldn't handle the cognitive dissonance between nice, friendly roommate who helps with homework and apex predator who dismantled a Draelith warrior like he was a learning exercise. She'd requested a transfer, then immediately withdrawn the request when she realized that putting distance between herself and the human might be interpreted as hostile. And making the human think you were a threat seemed like a spectacularly bad idea. Karshev had indeed transferred to a different dormitory section. He'd also taken a sudden interest in human anthropology, apparently subscribing to the principle of know your enemy. The fact that the human wasn't anyone's enemy, wasn't even capable of thinking in those terms unless actually threatened, somehow made it worse. She was a weapon that didn't know it was a weapon, a walking disaster that thought it was being friendly. The cafeteria had added a new section to their layout: high-energy Terran cuisine. It was located in a corner by itself, with warning labels in 6 languages explaining that the food contained animal proteins, high sugar content, and seasonings that would be considered chemical weapons on more civilized worlds. The human was thrilled. She left positive reviews on the station's food network. The cafeteria staff lived in constant fear of her cheerful compliments. Physical education class had been completely redesigned. Kelvas had created a separate track for Deathworlder integration, which currently had exactly 1 student enrolled. The human's daily light exercise routine would have qualified as advanced military training for most species. She ran laps while other students watched in horrified fascination. She did strength exercises using equipment that wasn't designed to accommodate her muscle density. She smiled and waved at people. She had become the Academy's unofficial mascot and simultaneous worst nightmare. In xenobiology, Professor Thelkar had scrapped his entire lecture series on evolutionary theory and started over from scratch. The human sat in the front row, taking diligent notes, occasionally raising her hand to ask questions that revealed just how differently her world worked. Wait, your species doesn't have an appendix. What do you do if you need to process cellulose? How do you handle bacterial infections if your immune system isn't constantly on offense? Is it normal that I'm still adjusting to the lower gravity? It's been 2 weeks and I keep accidentally jumping too high. The other students had stopped sitting near her. Not because she was rude, she was painfully polite. Not because she smelled wrong, though her pheromone profile did contain compounds that triggered instinctive flight responses. Simply because existing in close proximity to a persistence predator activated ancient survival instincts that no amount of civilization could fully suppress. She was a tiger that thought it was a house cat, and everyone else could see the teeth. The most surreal moments came when the human tried to make friends. She'd approach students in the common areas, smiling with all those omnivore teeth, and attempt to start conversations. Hey, want to study together? I noticed you're reading about quantum mechanics. That's so cool. Some of us are organizing a movie night. Want to come? Every invitation was genuine. Every attempt at social connection was sincere. And every single time, students would find polite excuses to decline while backing away slowly. The human didn't understand. How could she? On Earth, she was normal, unremarkable, probably below average in terms of her species' physical capabilities, if her comments about not being very athletic were accurate. She'd grown up in an environment where everything was trying to kill everything else, and that was just Tuesday. She'd survived childhood diseases that would have wiped out entire Quilnari populations. She'd played sports that involved intentional collision at high speeds. She'd eaten food that was actively fighting back in her digestive system. All of this was normal to her. Background radiation of existence. So when other students treated her like a natural disaster in humanoid form, she just thought they were shy, or culturally different, or maybe didn't like her for some inexplicable reason that definitely wasn't related to the fact that she represented millions of years of evolutionary optimization for killing things and eating them. 3 weeks after her arrival, Velmar Academy's administration quietly updated their safety protocols. They added new categories to their incident tracking system: Deathworlder interaction events, predator response scenarios, and existential dread counseling. The counter in the entrance hall still displayed days since last incident, but there was now a small asterisk next to it. The footnote explained, in admirably bureaucratic language, that incidents were now defined as unintentional harm resulting from interspecies interaction, and specifically excluded demonstrations of species-typical behavior that, while alarming, do not result in actual damage. The human walked past this updated display every day on her way to class. She'd occasionally glance at it with mild interest, completely unaware that she was the reason for every single addendum, footnote, and clarifying statement. The number kept climbing. Technically, they'd maintained their perfect safety record. No one had been physically harmed. Psychologically scarred? That was a different matter. But the Academy's insurance didn't cover psychological trauma resulting from accurate understanding of evolutionary biology. So, technically, they were fine. The human joined the debate club in week 4. The debate club immediately instituted new rules about aggressive argumentation and predatory rhetorical strategies. The human thought this was about being polite and carefully modulated her passion accordingly. Everyone else recognized it as the same pattern recognition and strategic prediction she demonstrated in the combat simulator, now applied to logical arguments. She won every debate by seeing exactly where her opponent's reasoning would lead before they got there themselves. She thought she was being a good team player. Her teammates were experiencing what the Draelith had felt: the dawning realization that they were being outthought by something that had evolved to track wounded prey across continents by reading disturbed grass patterns. Campus security started following her at a discreet distance. Not because she was dangerous, technically, but because her presence caused other students to alter their behaviors in measurable ways. Traffic patterns changed when she entered corridors. Study groups dissolved and reformed elsewhere. The security staff had initially interpreted this as potential bullying, then watched the footage from various monitoring systems and realized the truth was somehow more concerning. The human wasn't being avoided because anyone disliked her. She was being avoided because every species' ancient survival instincts were screaming warnings that their modern brains couldn't quite process. She organized a hiking trip in week 5. 0 people signed up. She seemed disappointed but not deterred. She went alone, which meant security had to discreetly follow her while she explored the station's recreational levels. She walked for 4 hours at a pace that would have exhausted most species in 30 minutes. She seemed relaxed the whole time, happy, in her element. Security filed a report noting that the human appeared to require excessive physical activity for psychological well-being and recommended the Academy ensure she had adequate opportunities for this. The report carefully avoided using words like hunting or patrolling territory, but everyone who read it understood the subtext. Professor Thelkar invited the human to give a guest lecture in week 6. Human Evolutionary Biology, a Deathworld Perspective. The auditorium was packed. Everyone wanted to understand. The human stood at the podium, pulled up a holographic display of Earth, and began talking about her homeworld with the kind of fond enthusiasm that made everything worse. "So Earth is pretty wet," she began cheerfully. "About 70% of the surface is liquid water, which I guess is unusual. We have these massive weather systems that move water around through atmospheric circulation. Sometimes the water falls from the sky really hard. We call those storms. Sometimes the storms get really big and destroy stuff. We call those hurricanes. Sometimes the ground shakes and cities fall down. We call those earthquakes. Sometimes mountains explode and cover everything in ash. We call those volcanoes. She clicked to the next slide, showing various terrestrial fauna. These are some animals. That's a bear. They're basically tanks with teeth. That's a shark. They're older than trees and perfect killing machines. That's a mosquito. They kill more humans per year than any other animal through disease transmission. That's a hippopotamus. They look funny, but they're hyper-aggressive and will absolutely murder you. That's a box jellyfish. Touching them kills you. That's a pufferfish. Eating them kills you unless you prepare them exactly right, so naturally we consider them a delicacy. The auditorium had gone very quiet. The human didn't notice. Humans are persistence predators, like we talked about. We're also persistence everything, really. We don't give up. It's kind of our defining trait. If we want something, we keep trying until we get it or die. Usually we get it. We're very stubborn. Some people say it's our best quality. Others say it's incredibly annoying. Probably both are true. She talked for an hour about adaptation, about human history, about how her species had spread across their entire planet despite it trying to kill them at every opportunity. She showed footage of human athletic competitions where people ran until their bodies failed, climbed mountains that didn't want to be climbed, and swam in water cold enough to stop most species' cardiovascular systems. She explained human cuisine, human medicine, human social structures. All of it delivered with genuine enthusiasm and complete obliviousness to the growing horror in her audience. The lecture ended with a question period. One brave Quilnari student raised a crystalline manipulator. Why did your species develop such extreme capabilities? What was the evolutionary pressure? The human considered this seriously. Honestly, we're not entirely sure. Earth just kept trying to kill us, and we kept refusing to die. Ice ages, meteor impacts, supervolcanoes, climate shifts. Our planet has had like 5 major extinction events. We survived all of them by being adaptable and really stubborn. I guess you could say Earth made us this way. We're products of our environment. The student who'd asked the question carefully did not point out that products of our environment was exactly what made the human so terrifying. Earth had forged its apex species through millions of years of escalating challenges. And the result was sitting on stage, smiling, thinking she was just sharing interesting facts about her homeworld. Week 7 brought an incident that would become Academy legend. A fire alarm triggered in the dormitory section at 2 a.m. Standard evacuation protocols activated. Students filed out in orderly lines, heading to designated assembly points. The human, who'd been sleeping, came out wearing soft clothing designed for comfort rather than protection. And she was barefoot. Multiple species stared at her exposed feet with the kind of morbid fascination usually reserved for studying weapons systems. Human feet were architectural nightmares. Limited claws, minimal padding, bones arranged in arches that seemed structurally unsound. They looked fragile, vulnerable. They looked like something that should require protective covering at all times. The human walked across the station's metal decking without any sign of discomfort. Her feet, it turned out, were covered in thick skin that had calcified into something resembling organic armor. She'd walked on surfaces rough enough to shred Quilnari crystal structures, hot enough to damage Thessaran sensory membranes, cold enough to crack Dralith scales. Her feet were just fine. used to it, optimized for exactly this kind of punishment through years of development on a planet where the ground itself was hostile. "Sorry, I didn't have time to grab shoes," she said, noticing the stairs. The alarm was pretty urgent. The false alarm was cleared quickly. The image of the human's calloused feet walking across bare metal without protection haunted students' dreams for weeks afterward. It was such a small thing, such a minor demonstration of difference. But it crystallized the fundamental disconnect. What the human considered normal was genuinely hazardous by any reasonable standard. The cafeteria staff had started leaving offerings, not officially, not in any coordinated way. But the human would often find her favorite foods prepared exactly how she liked them, ready and waiting. The staff had collectively decided that keeping the apex predator happy was a survival strategy older than civilization itself. If preparing her meals properly prevented her from remembering that humans were capable of hunting fresh prey, that seemed like a reasonable trade-off. The human thought they were just being nice. She left generous tips in the feedback system. She complimented their cooking enthusiastically. She remained utterly oblivious to the fact that she was receiving the culinary equivalent of tribute to an ancient deity. Week 8 marked a subtle shift. Students had stopped avoiding her quite so overtly. The initial panic had settled into wary acceptance. She was dangerous, yes, but predictably so. As long as no one triggered her prey drive, and exactly what might trigger that remained terrifying speculation, she was perfectly friendly. Possibly the friendliest person on the entire station. The cognitive dissonance was still present, but everyone was learning to function despite it. Vextith had stopped stress fracturing every time the human entered their dorm room. They'd even started having actual conversations, carefully modulated with Vexith maintaining maximum distance, but conversations nonetheless. The human would do her homework while eating snacks that could serve as chemical weapons. Vexith would study while internally screaming. They were becoming friends, in a way that would require extensive therapy for Vexith to fully process eventually. Karshev, surprisingly, became something like a cautious ally. The humiliation of their match had transformed into respect once he'd processed the implications. The human had demolished him while actively holding back and trying not to hurt his feelings. That required both capability and restraint. The combination of those traits was worthy of respect in Drelith culture. He started sitting near her in classes, never too close, never in a position where she could easily attack him, but close enough to indicate he acknowledged her status. The debate club had evolved into something terrifying. The human and 3 other students, who'd apparently decided that if you couldn't beat her, you might as well learn from her, had become an unstoppable team. They won every competition. Other schools started filing complaints about unfair cognitive advantages and predatory argumentation strategies. The complaints were dismissed when judges reviewed the footage and realized the human was just really, really good at understanding how people thought. Which was exactly what made her team terrifying, but wasn't technically against regulations. Week 10 brought a guest speaker, a human diplomat from one of the established colonies. The Academy had invited her, specifically to help students understand human integration into galactic society. She arrived with the kind of practiced ease that came from years of interspecies interaction. She was also 2 meters tall, heavily muscled, and moved with the casual confidence of something that could tear through hull plating if mildly inconvenienced. The student's newest human looked tiny by comparison. "Oh, cool. Another human?" Their human said excitedly, approaching the diplomat without hesitation. "I haven't seen anyone from home in months." The diplomat smiled, another display of omnivore teeth. And the two humans engaged in a greeting ritual that involved collision at speed and mutual constriction of torsos. Several species' threat response systems activated immediately. The humans called it hugging and seemed to consider it affectionate. It looked like the preliminary phase of combat. The diplomat's presentation focused on human integration challenges, cultural differences, and diplomatic protocols. She was professional, informative, and utterly aware of how her presence affected the audience. Unlike their resident human, this one knew exactly what she represented and had learned to manage it carefully. Humans and the galactic community have been working together for about 40 years now, the diplomat explained. It's been an adjustment for everyone. We're used to environments that most species consider uninhabitable. We have dietary requirements that some find disturbing. Our idea of acceptable risk differs significantly from galactic norms. But we're learning to bridge those gaps. A student raised a manipulator. How many humans are in the galactic community? Approximately 8 million across various stations, colonies, and diplomatic posts. Earth's population is around 12 billion, but most humans prefer to stay on our homeworld. We're very attached to our planet, despite it trying to kill us constantly. Another question. Are all humans as capable as the ones we've met? The diplomat's smile widened slightly. These two? They're actually pretty average by human standards, maybe even on the gentle side. You should meet my sister. She does something called mixed martial arts competitively. That's where humans fight each other for sport using various combat techniques, in a cage, while other humans watch and cheer. The silence in the auditorium was profound. The students looked at their human who demolished Karshev without breaking a sweat and considered herself not very athletic. Then they looked at the diplomat, who was casually mentioning that there were humans who fought each other recreationally and that this was considered entertainment. But don't worry, the diplomat continued, apparently interpreting the silence correctly. Humans are very good at impulse control. We've been managing our aggressive instincts for thousands of years. We're much more likely to help you with homework than hunt you for sport. The hunting, the Kosker thing, is really only for food or genuine threats. This was meant to be reassuring. It was not reassuring. The presentation ended with the diplomat offering to answer questions individually. Most students declined and filed out quietly. A few brave souls approached, drawn by morbid curiosity. The Academy's human joined them, apparently thrilled to have another member of her species to talk to. How are you finding it here? The diplomat asked her. Oh, it's great. Everyone's really nice. The facilities are amazing. I'm learning so much. Any problems with integration? Not really. People seem kind of nervous around me sometimes, but I figure that's just cultural differences. I'm trying to be respectful of everyone's boundaries. The diplomat's expression suggested she understood exactly what was happening, but wasn't going to explain it. That's good. Keep being yourself. You're doing important work just by being here, even if you don't realize it. What kind of work? Showing the galaxy that humans can coexist peacefully with other species, that we're more than just our evolutionary history, that we can be friends, colleagues, allies. The diplomat paused. Even if we're also secretly terrifying apex predators, who could probably take over the station if we got organized about it. Why would we take over the station? The human asked, genuinely confused. Exactly, the diplomat said with a smile. That's exactly the attitude that makes integration possible. Week 12 marked the end of the semester. Final examinations loomed. The human studied with the same intensity she brought to everything else. which meant she didn't just prepare for exams, she consumed the material entirely, processing it through that relentless, persistence predator brain until she understood not just the facts, but the underlying patterns and principles. She didn't get the highest scores in every class. The Quilnari students excelled at pure mathematics. The Thesserans dominated artistic disciplines. The Drelith performed best in strategic planning courses. But the human was consistently in the top tier across all subjects, demonstrating that terrifying adaptability that characterized her species. In xenobiology, she wrote her final paper on Deathworld evolutionary pressures and their impact on species development. Professor Thelkar gave it the highest marks he'd ever awarded, with a note. Brilliant analysis. Though I suspect the author doesn't fully grasp how disturbing these concepts are to non-Deathworld species. In tactical theory, she designed a combat scenario that made Karshev physically uncomfortable when he reviewed it. It was technically perfect, strategically sound, and revealed an understanding of predator-prey dynamics that was deeply instinctual. She received top marks, and several professors quietly updated their lesson plans to include human tactical thinking as a case study in adaptive warfare. The debate club won the sector championship. The human gave a closing argument that judges described as disturbingly effective and like watching someone's logic get hunted to exhaustion. Her team received their trophy with pride. Everyone else received therapy recommendations. Physical education concluded with a demonstration of various species' athletic capabilities. The human volunteered to show human endurance running. Kelvas, who'd spent the semester redesigning her entire curriculum around one impossible student, set up a simple challenge. Run as far as comfortable in 30 minutes. The human ran for the full 30 minutes at a pace that would have been a sprint for most species. She covered 15 kilometers. She finished by asking if she could have a bit more time because she was just getting warmed up. Kelvas retired the following semester. Not because of stress, not because of fear, but because after 60 years of teaching, she'd finally encountered a species that made her realize how much she didn't understand about physical potential. She wanted time to study, to learn, to completely reconstruct her understanding of what was possible. The human attended Kelvas's retirement party and gave a heartfelt speech about what an inspiring teacher she'd been. Kelvas accepted the compliment with grace while internally screaming. The semester ended with a social gathering. Multiple species, multiple cultures, celebrating successful completion of their studies. The human attended wearing something she called a dress, which was apparently formal wear for her species. She looked almost fragile in it. Delicate. Several students had to consciously remind themselves that this delicate-looking creature had demonstrated combat capabilities that would qualify as special forces training for most civilizations. She mingled with the kind of genuine friendliness that had characterized her entire semester. She complimented people's achievements. She shared snacks from Earth that were carefully labeled with warning indicators about chemical content. She laughed at jokes, told stories about her homeworld, and seemed genuinely happy to be part of the community. Karshev approached her toward the end of the evening. The Drelith had spent 12 weeks processing his humiliation and had apparently reached some kind of internal resolution. "I wanted to apologize," he said formally. "My challenge was arrogant. I underestimated you based on appearance rather than capability." The human looked surprised. "Oh, you don't need to apologize. It was actually fun. I don't get to spar much here." "That was sparring?" Karshev's crest flattened involuntarily. "You were holding back?" "Well, yeah. It was a training simulation. I wasn't trying to actually beat you, just practice some techniques. My brothers and I used to go way harder than that. The revelation that the human had siblings, multiple siblings, who she'd regularly engaged in combat with as recreational bonding sent Khrushchev's threat assessment into territory his biology wasn't equipped to handle. Your family practices combat together? Sure, it's how we learn to handle conflict. Physical exercise, strategic thinking, bonding time. Sometimes our dad would join in. Those sessions got really intense. She smiled fondly at the memory, completely unaware that she was describing what most species would consider gladiatorial training within family units. Khrushchev processed this information with the grim resignation of someone who'd finally understood how outmatched his entire species was by these cheerful primates from the horrible death planet. Thank you for the match. I learned much. Anytime. If you ever want a rematch, just let me know. It's nice having someone to train with. Khrushchev would not, in fact, be requesting a rematch. He'd already sent applications to transfer to a nice safe archive position on a station with no humans. He didn't hate the human. He just recognized that his pride had limits, and those limits had been thoroughly discovered. The evening concluded with formal farewells. Students exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch across the vast distances of space. The human collected more contact details than anyone else, apparently having made friends despite every biological instinct telling people to maintain distance. She was thrilled. She'd successfully integrated into galactic society. Everyone else was exhausted from 12 weeks of managing their evolutionary panic responses. The Academy's administration gathered after the event to review the semester. The consensus was clear. The experiment in human integration had been successful. No incidents, no injuries, no catastrophes, just one very friendly apex predator who'd somehow managed to befriend dozens of species despite being an evolutionary nightmare. Should we accept more human applicants? Someone asked. The director considered the question carefully. They looked at the updated safety protocols, the modified curricula, the counseling services they'd expanded, the combat simulation updates, the cafeteria renovations, the security briefings, all the infrastructure they'd built around accommodating a single human student. Yes, the director decided, but maybe just one per semester, for everyone's sanity. The human, blissfully unaware of this conversation, returned to her dorm room. Vexith was already there, having fled the party when the crowd density exceeded her comfort threshold. How was the gathering? Vexith asked, her light pulses carefully neutral. Great. I think I really connected with people. Everyone was so nice. The human began removing her formal wear, changing into sleeping clothes. I was worried at first that people didn't like me, but I think we're really becoming friends. Vexith, who'd spent 12 weeks in various states of crystalline panic, somehow found this endearing. The human's complete obliviousness to her own impact was almost charming. Almost. If you could forget that she was a Deathworld predator who could probably tear through the station's hull plating if sufficiently motivated. I am glad you found community, Vexith managed. You have been a educational roommate. Aw, thanks. You've been great too. Want to watch something before sleep? They settled into their respective rest spaces and activated the entertainment system. The human selected a nature documentary from Earth. Within minutes, Vexith was reminded exactly why her species had developed crystalline structure instead of soft tissues. The documentary showed Earth predators hunting, Earth weather destroying landscapes, and Earth humans casually existing in all of it. Your planet is horrifying, Vexith observed. Yeah, but it's home, the human said fondly. I miss it sometimes. The real gravity, the storms, The season's changing, you know? Vexith did not know. Vexith's homeworld was a stable paradise, where weather was a theoretical concept and seasonal variation meant the ambient temperature shifted by maybe 2 degrees annually. But she made sympathetic light patterns anyway, because that's what friends did. The documentary ended. The human fell asleep with the easy confidence of something that had no natural predators. Vexith remained awake, processing the semester, trying to reconcile the friendly roommate who helped her with homework with the tactical genius who dismantled a Draelith warrior like he was a learning exercise. Morning came with station standard lighting adjustments. The human woke cheerfully, as she did every morning, apparently programmed for diurnal activity by millions of years of evolution. She stretched, showered, dressed, and headed to breakfast with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything. The cafeteria had prepared her favorites. The staff watched nervously as she loaded her tray with proteins and starches and compounds that would hospitalize most species. She thanked them genuinely. She sat at a table. She ate with mechanical efficiency. And she smiled at passing students with all those omnivore teeth, completely unaware that she'd spent 12 weeks becoming a legend, a cautionary tale, and a diplomatic bridge between humanity and the galaxy all at once. The Academy's counter continued climbing. Days since last incident. The asterisks and footnotes multiplied in the fine print. The fundamental truth remained unchanged. Velmar Intergalactic Academy had maintained its perfect safety record. They just redefined what safe meant to accommodate humans. And somewhere in the depths of galactic bureaucracy, a report was being filed recommending wider human integration into society. The conclusion was simple. Humans were dangerous, yes. Apex predators from a nightmare planet, absolutely. But they were also capable of friendship, loyalty, and cooperation. They could be allies, friends, colleagues, as long as everyone remembered never, ever to trigger their prey drive. The human finished her, breakfast, disposed of her waste, and headed to her first class of the new day. She was thinking about her coursework, her friends, her plans for the weekend. She was happy. She was thriving. She was exactly what she'd always been, a perfectly normal human girl, completely unaware that perfectly normal human was an oxymoron to everyone else in the galaxy. And that, perhaps, was the most terrifying thing of all.